My name is Ashley Walker and I'm 28 years old. 4 years as an Army combat medic in Iraq taught me to face chaos head-on, but nothing hit harder than a call that came during what should have been family dinner time 6 p.m. when families share stories over a warm meal. I was in the mess hall when my grandfather's voicemail came through, his voice so faint I could barely hear it. Ashley, not doing so good. Your parents aren't picking up. The tremble in his words froze me. I'd heard that tone before, soldiers on the edge of losing it all. My grandfather never asked for help, not once. I hit replay, my gut screaming something was wrong, and started pulling every string for emergency leave. What I found broke me: a house abandoned, my grandfather dying alone in silence, and a betrayal that burned deeper than any battlefield wound. My parents and brother, they were in Hawaii, splashing wine in Facebook photos, grinning like they hadn't a care. I opened my grandfather's safe, pulled out the will he'd hidden, and 1 week later my phone lit up with 33 missed calls. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know what time you're listening right now and which city you're in. It's incredible to see how far these real experiences reach. Iraq had forged me, sprinting through gunfire to stabilize teammates' hands steady on tourniquets, dragging soldiers to safety in brutal missions. My unit was family bound by trust civilians couldn't grasp. Weeks earlier, we'd handled a rapid response to a field injury, saving a sergeant under pressure. Captain noticed me glued to that voicemail later, my food untouched. Walker talked to me, he said. I played at my grandfather's plea and a whisper about my brother borrowing money years ago, never repaid for his so-called business. Captain pushed my leave through, saying, "Go fix this." The flights were a haze, my calls to my parents hitting voicemail. I didn't warn them I was coming, partly to surprise, partly to see what they were hiding. In Denver's suburbs, my grandfather's house loomed, yard choked with weeds, porch buried in newspapers. The spare key was still under the rock. Inside, the air reeked of illness. "Grandfather, it's Ashley." Silence. Upstairs, he lay still, chest barely moving, skin burning. I checked his pulse, weak, fading, and dialed 911, my voice steady but rage boiling. This wasn't neglect. This was betrayal, and I'd make them pay. Before I dive deeper into this story, I'd love to know what time you're listening right now and which city you're in. It's incredible to see how far these real experiences reach. My hands shook as I relayed Grandpa's condition to the 911 dispatcher, my combat medic training, keeping my voice steady despite the panic clawing at me. Male 79, severe dehydration, missed heart meds, signs of malnutrition, probable pneumonia onset. The paramedics arrived fast, bursting through the front door of the quiet Denver suburban house. I identified myself as a combat medic, rattling off vitals and symptoms to Megan, the lead paramedic, who nodded as she hooked up an IV. "Good call getting here when you did," she said, her tone grim. Another day, and he might not have made it. In the ambulance, I gripped Grandpa's frail hand, his skin paper-thin, veins stark under the fluorescent light. His eyes flickered open, unfocused but locking onto mine. "Ashley, you shouldn't be here," he rasped, guilt in his voice. "Your service?" I squeezed his hand. "I'm right where I need to be." But my mind was racing, piecing together the neglect, unopened meds, moldy dishes, the house falling apart. This wasn't a one-day oversight. This was weeks of abandonment, and I couldn't shake the image of my parents and David sipping cocktails in Hawaii, their Facebook posts mocking me with their carefree captions. Back in Iraq, my life had been a cycle of high-stakes missions. Just 3 weeks before my unit had scrambled to a field injury, soldiers hit during a patrol, chaos everywhere. I'd sprinted to Private Alex Martinez, blood soaking his leg, and applied a tourniquet while shouting for cover. Specialist Megan Garcia dragged him behind a barrier as I worked bullets kicking up dust nearby. Lieutenant Kevin Miller and Sergeant Ryan Collins made it out too, thanks to our teamwork. "Walker, you're a machine under pressure," Captain Brandon Young had said, later clapping my shoulder. That moment stuck with me, trust forged in crisis, the kind of bond my real family seemed to lack. It was Captain Brandon who'd noticed me unraveling after Grandpa's voicemail. I'd been sitting alone in the mess hall replaying it, his frail voice cutting through the noise of clattering trays. "Something's off, Walker," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I told him about Grandpa, how he'd raised me during my parents' endless self-discovery trips, how my brother David had borrowed $3,000 from me before I deployed, claiming it was for his startup. I'd wired it from my savings, trusting him, only to learn later he'd blown it on a trip to Vegas with his wife. Captain didn't hesitate. "File for emergency leave. I'll pull strings." The process wasn't easy. Paperwork approvals, signatures from multiple officers. Military bureaucracy moved like molasses without hard proof of a crisis. I called my parents' phones, then David's over and over, straight to voicemail. Grandpa's line rang dead too. Captain Brandon called in favors citing my record. "Your gut's telling you something, Walker. That's enough for me," he said. When the leave finally cleared, my unit gathered at the airstrip. "Don't get soft on us stateside." Megan Garcia teased her hug tight. Ryan Collins, gruff as ever, muttered, "Take care of your grandpa, then get back here." The journey to Denver was a blur. Military transports, commercial flights, layovers, where I kept dialing each unanswered call, twisting the knot in my stomach tighter. I didn't tell my family I was coming. Part of me wanted to see their faces when I walked in unannounced, but another part, the part sharpened by years in a war zone, wanted to catch them off guard to see what they were hiding. Landing in Denver, the quiet suburbs felt surreal after Iraq's chaos. The taxi driver glanced at my uniform, my duffel bag heavy at my feet. "Homecoming?" he asked. I shrugged. "Something like that." When I stepped into Grandpa's house, the neglect hit like a punch. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence, the air thick with that unmistakable smell of illness I knew from field hospitals. My boots echoed as I moved upstairs, calling his name. Finding him in that bedroom, barely breathing, flipped a switch in me. As the paramedics loaded him onto the stretcher, Megan, the paramedic, asked, "You trained in the field?" I nodded, handing her his unopened pill bottles. 4 years in Iraq. "You learned to move fast." She shook her head. "He's lucky you showed up." At the hospital, they rushed Grandpa to the ER, leaving me in the waiting room, helpless, a stark contrast to the control I'd had in combat. My medic instincts screamed to act, but here I was, just a granddaughter, not a soldier. I pulled out Grandpa's phone, which I'd grabbed with his wallet, needing answers. A text thread from 3 weeks ago stopped me cold. He'd written to my mom, "Not feeling well, trouble with meds. Can you come by?" Her reply, "Busy with work, Dad. Call a neighbor." He texted again, desperate, "Please, I don't feel right." No response. Then I saw David's name in the thread. "Mom swamped Grandpa. I'll handle it." But he didn't. The next day, they'd all jetted off to Hawaii, leaving him alone. I opened Facebook on my phone, and there they were, my parents, and David, tanned and laughing in beach photos. "Paradise vibes," one caption read, posted while Grandpa was starving in his bed. Another showed David's wife raising a wine glass, time-stamped 2 days after his last text. My hands clenched, the betrayal sinking in deeper. David, the brother I'd trusted with my savings, had lied again. He wasn't just neglecting Grandpa, he was part of something uglier. I needed proof, and I needed it now. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, I stared at Grandpa's phone, the text thread burning into my eyes. My mom's dismissal, "Busy with work, Dad. Call a neighbor," and David's lie, "I'll handle it," felt like knives. They'd left him to rot while posting beach selfies in Hawaii. I scrolled through their Facebook again, each photo twisting the blade deeper. My parents, tanned and grinning, captioned one post, "Living our best life." David's wife held a wine glass in another, her kids splashing in the ocean, time-stamped the day after Grandpa's desperate plea. My brother, who'd conned me out of $3,000 for his fake startup, was at it again, lying, abandoning, profiting. I dialed my mom's number. my thumb hovering before hitting call. The line rang 4 times before she picked up, laughter and music spilling through the background. "Ashley, honey." What a surprise! Her voice was syrupy, slurred from drinks. "Where are you?" I asked, keeping my tone even though my grip on the phone tightened. "Oh, we're just in Hawaii, a little getaway. Much needed break, with all the stress of looking after your grandfather." She giggled, the sound grating like sandpaper. "Stress," I snapped. "I'm sitting in the ICU with Grandpa right now. He's in critical condition, dehydrated, malnourished, missed his heart meds for weeks. Alone." Silence stretched. Then she stammered, "That's impossible. We arranged everything. David's been checking on him." Her tone shifted sharp now. "You left us to play soldier, Ashley. David stepped up while you were off in your war zone." The guilt trip hit hard, dragging me back to that moment I'd wired David the money, believing his sob story about a business deal. He'd partied in Vegas instead, and now he was stepping up. I bit back my anger. "Really? Because his last text to Grandpa was a lie, and your nurse quit." I hung up before she could respond, my pulse hammering. I needed facts, not excuses. Scrolling through Grandpa's contacts, I found the home nurse, Samantha Taylor. I called, bracing myself. "Samantha, this is Ashley Walker, Charles Thompson's granddaughter. I'm a combat medic, just got back from Iraq. I found Grandpa in bad shape." "Why'd you stop coming?" She sighed, heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry, Ashley. I stopped 2 weeks ago. Your brother David handled payments, but he stopped sending checks 6 weeks back. I kept going unpaid for a while because I was worried about Charles, but I've got my own family to feed." "Did you tell my parents or David about Grandpa's condition?" I pressed. "I called David repeatedly," she said. "Left voicemails about Charles needing his meds, needing check-ins. He said it was under control, that he'd hired another service. I asked for their contact to pass on my notes, but he brushed me off." I clenched my jaw. "There was no other service, was there?" Samantha paused. "No. I'm so sorry." I thanked her, promising to follow up, my mind racing. David wasn't just negligent, he was orchestrating this. Back in Iraq, I'd learned to read people under pressure. You see it in their eyes, fear lies, or resolve. David's lies were piling up, just like when he'd sweet-talked me into that loan, promising repayment while booking flights to Vegas. I'd trusted him then, but not now. I pulled up Grandpa's phone again, digging deeper. Another text from him to David a week before the Hawaii trip, hard to get upstairs. "Please come by." David's reply, "Busy, Grandpa. I'll send someone." He hadn't. The betrayal wasn't just careless, it was calculated. I leaned back in the stiff hospital chair, the hum of monitors filling the silence. The doctor, Nathan Cole, stepped out. "Family of Charles Thompson." I stood, my duffel still at my feet. "I'm his granddaughter, Ashley Walker." He nodded, his face serious. "He's stable, but critical. Severe dehydration, pneumonia, setting and missed medications for at least 2 weeks. He's lucky you got here." I swallowed hard. "Can I see him?" He led me to the ICU, where Grandpa lay under white sheets, tubes snaking from his arms. His eyes were clearer, now meeting mine. "Ashley," he whispered, voice weak but warm. "You came all this way." I took his hand, careful not to jostle the IV. "Of course I did." "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" He looked away, ashamed. "Your parents said you were too busy saving lives. David promised he'd handle everything." My stomach twisted. "David again." "When did you last see them?" I asked. "A month ago," he said. "Dropped off groceries, said they were swamped with work. Then the nurse stopped coming." He closed his eyes, exhausted. I tried to manage. I stepped outside to clear my head, the hospital's sterile smell sharp in my nose. My parents and David hadn't just neglected Grandpa, they'd lied to him, to the nurse, to me. Those Facebook posts flashed in my mind, David's wife laughing, my parents toasting by the beach, all while Grandpa starved. But something didn't add up. Grandpa had savings, a pension, more than enough to cover a nurse bill's care. Where was the money going? I gripped my phone, a plan forming. I'd start at Grandpa's house, dig through every drawer, every file. If David was behind this, I'd find proof. And when I did, he'd regret ever crossing me. Back at Grandpa's house that night, the silence felt heavier than any war zone. The hospital had stabilized him, but I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. The kitchen counter was buried under unopened bills, electric water property tax, all stamped past due. I rifled through drawers, finding bank statements that made my blood run cold. Regular withdrawals, thousands at a time, drained from Grandpa's savings over the past year. One name kept popping up as cosigner: David. My brother, who'd scammed me out of $3,000 for his fake startup, was bleeding Grandpa dry. I moved to the basement where Grandpa kept his old desk. Dust coated everything, but a stack of credit card statements caught my eye. Charges for restaurants, boutiques, a travel agency, places Grandpa would never visit. One receipt showed a $5,000 payment for a Hawaii resort signed by David. Another listed an auction sale for Grandpa's antique watch collection worth $10,000 with David's signature. My hands shook as I pieced it together. This wasn't neglect. It was theft, systematic, deliberate, and led by my brother with my parents' blessing. Then I remembered something Grandpa had shown me years ago before I deployed. He'd led me to this basement, pointing to a small painting of the Rockies on the wall. "Ashley, if anything ever happens to me, check behind this," he'd said, his voice serious. I slid the painting aside, revealing a wall safe. My birthday, 0315199997, unlocked it with a click. Inside were folders, a USB drive labeled "For Ashley," and a note in Grandpa's neat handwriting: "Watch first." My throat tightened. Even now he was protecting me. I plugged the USB into his old laptop, the screen flickering to life. Grandpa's face appeared, gray hair, combed eyes, sharp but heavy with worry. "Ashley," he began, "if you're seeing this, something's gone wrong. I've always feared your parents and David might prioritize themselves over family. Your mother and father have leaned on my savings too long, but David, he's the one I worry about most. He borrowed from me years ago, never repaid, always had excuses. I saw calculation in his eyes when we discussed my health last year." He leaned closer, voice firm. "I set up a trust for my care with your parents and David as executors, but with strict rules. If they neglect me or misuse funds, my lawyer Matthew Lewis has instructions to transfer control to you. You're the only one I trust, Ashley, with your honor and duty from the Army. The documents are in this safe, including a contingency clause to remove them as executors and make you my power of attorney." He paused, softening. "I'm proud of you, granddaughter. Protect yourself and our family's legacy." The video ended, and I sat, frozen, tears burning my eyes. Grandpa had known, had seen through David's lies, my parents' selfishness, and prepared for this. I opened the folders, his will, trust details, and Matthew Lewis's business card with a note. "Call any time." It was 10 p.m., too late to call, but I'd be at his office first thing tomorrow. The evidence was damning: David's signatures, the drained accounts, the sold antiques. They'd gambled with Grandpa's life, and I'd make sure they lost everything. I barely slept, my mind replaying Grandpa's video, David's fake promises, my parents' beach photos. In Iraq, I'd faced split-second decisions, tourniquets under fire, dragging teammates to safety. This was different, but just as urgent. I remembered a mission where I'd stabilized Lieutenant Kevin Miller, blood pouring from his arm, while Specialist Megan Garcia covered us. "You've got steady hands, Walker," she'd said. Those hands were steady now, sorting documents, preparing for battle. My parents and David thought they could outsmart everyone, but they didn't know me anymore. By morning, I was at Matthew Lewis's office in downtown Denver, folders and USB in my bag. The receptionist ushered me in, saying, "Mr. Lewis has been expecting a call from your family for years." Matthew, a gray-haired man in his 60s, stood to shake my hand. "Ashley Walker, your grandfather spoke highly of you, your service, your strength." I laid out everything: Grandpa's critical condition, the unpaid bills David's forged, signatures, the auctioned antiques, the Hawaii trip while he starved. I played the video, Matthew's face hardening with each word. "This is clear elder neglect and financial exploitation," he said, tapping the contingency clause. "Your grandfather's will is airtight. We can file an emergency petition today to grant you temporary guardianship and freeze all accounts your parents and David have accessed." I nodded, my resolve solid. "How fast can we move?" Matthew's eyes narrowed. "I'll call Judge Victoria Lane directly. She's handled cases like this before. With Grandpa's condition and this evidence, we'll get a hearing by afternoon." As we prepared the paperwork, my phone buzzed another call from David. I let it go to voicemail, his voice smug through the speaker. "Ashley, you're overreacting. Let's talk this out like family." Family. He'd sold Grandpa's legacy for a beach vacation. I deleted the message, my anger sharpening into a plan. The court would be just the start. I'd expose every lie, every dollar they stole, and make sure they faced consequences not just in court, but in every way that hurt. By noon, Matthew, Lewis, and I sat in Judge Victoria Lane's chambers, the air thick with tension. The emergency petition was on her desk, Grandpa's medical reports, bank statements showing drained accounts, David's forged signatures, and the auction receipt for his antiques. Matthew presented the case with precision: elder neglect, financial exploitation, and Grandpa's video laying out the contingency clause. I sat straight, my army training keeping me calm, but inside fury simmered. Judge Lane, a sharp woman in her 60s, scanned the documents, her expression unreadable. "This is egregious," she finally said. "Temporary guardianship is granted to Ashley Walker, effective immediately. All accounts are frozen, and a restraining order will bar your parents and brother from accessing Charles Thompson's assets." I exhaled relief, mixing with resolve. Matthew squeezed my shoulder as we left the courthouse. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "But brace yourself, they'll fight back." He was right. My phone buzzed relentlessly, David's number, then my parents' calls piling up. I ignored them, heading back to the hospital to check on Grandpa. His condition was improving, but he looked fragile under the ICU monitors. I held his hand, promising, "I've got you now. They can't hurt you anymore." His weak smile fueled my determination. Hours later, my parents and David stormed into the ICU, their resort tans jarring against the sterile room. My mother, clutching a designer purse, spoke first, voice loud enough to spike Grandpa's heart rate on the monitor. "Ashley, what is this nonsense? Legal papers at the airport? You're freezing our accounts." My father stepped forward, face red. "You've lost it, staging some military coup against your own family." David, in a crisp polo, smirked. "Grandpa wanted us to live well, Ashley. You're blowing this out of proportion." I stood, positioning myself between them and Grandpa's bed, my voice low but commanding. "Keep it down, this is an ICU. I found Grandpa starving alone while you were sipping wine in Hawaii. David, you forged his signatures, sold his antiques, drained his pension. You call that living well?" David's smirk faltered, but he doubled down. "You don't get it. You ran off to war, left us to handle everything." I stepped up. My mother nodded. "David's been here, Ashley, unlike you." Their words stung, dragging me back to that $3,000 loan. David never repaid his lies about a startup while he partied in Vegas. I leaned in, voice steady. Stepped up. "You stopped paying the nurse Samantha 6 weeks ago. You ignored Grandpa's texts begging for help. I've got the bank statements, the auction receipts, your name's on everything, David." My father scoffed. "You're paranoid, Ashley. That war messed you up." I held up Grandpa's phone, showing their ignored texts. "This isn't paranoia. It's evidence." A nurse signaled for security as Grandpa's monitors beeped faster. My mother's eyes darted, her tone shifting to fake concern. "We're his family, Ashley. You can't keep us from him." I didn't blink. "The restraining order says I can. You'll get your chance in court in 30 days. Until then, stay away." David stepped closer, voice low. "You're making a mistake, Ashley. We'll fight this." I met his gaze, my combat instincts kicking in. Try me. Now leave, or security will. A guard appeared, and they left my mother's dramatic huff echoing down the hall. I turned to Grandpa, his eyes wide but proud. "You sounded like me in my prime," he whispered. I squeezed his hand, guilt and anger warring inside me. They'd nearly killed him, and now they were playing victims. Back at Grandpa's house that evening, I dug deeper, finding more evidence: a mortgage application with David's forged signature, attempting to refinance Grandpa's paid-off home. The bank had flagged it, but the attempt alone was damning. Matthew called, confirming the investigation was moving fast. "We've got records of $150,000 diverted over the past year," he said. "David's signatures are everywhere with your parents' approval." I sat in Grandpa's basement, surrounded by his old photos and books, my resolve hardening. In Iraq, I'd learned to act decisively, stabilizing wounds under fire, making calls that saved lives. This was no different. David thought he could gaslight me, but the evidence was ironclad. My parents thought they could guilt me, but I was done with their lies. Matthew's next words sealed it. "The judge wants a full accounting. We're pushing for permanent removal of their executor status. You ready for the next step?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. More than ready. My phone lit up again, another voicemail from David, his tone desperate now. "Ashley, let's work this out. You don't want to tear the family apart. Tear the family apart." They'd done that when they left Grandpa to die. I deleted the message, my plan clear. Court was just the beginning. I'd expose their lies to everyone, friends, neighbors online, and make sure they faced every consequence. David's smug face in those Hawaii photos flashed in my mind. He'd regret underestimating me. The days after the hospital confrontation were a storm of action. Matthew Lewis moved like lightning, filing for a permanent removal of my parents and David as executors of Grandpa's will. The evidence was airtight: $150,000 siphoned from Grandpa's accounts, forged mortgage applications, and his antique watch collection sold off for David's luxury vacations. I wasn't just fighting for Grandpa anymore. I was dismantling their lies. My phone kept buzzing, voicemails piling up from my mother pleading, "Ashley, we're family. Don't do this." And David, his tone shifting from smug to panicked. "You're ruining us." I deleted each one, my resolve like steel forged in Iraq's chaos. I took it further. Using my military network, I reached out to a contact in the Denver DA's office, a former Army buddy who specialized in financial crimes. I sent him the bank statements, auction receipts, and Grandpa's video pushing for a criminal investigation into David for embezzlement. "This is solid," he said. "We'll open a case." Meanwhile, I drafted a public post on my own Facebook, uploading side-by-side images: Grandpa frail in his hospital bed, tubes in his arms next to my parents, and David toasting wine glasses in Hawaii. The caption was simple: "While my grandfathers starved, they partied." This is what elder neglect looks like. I hit post and it spread fast. Neighbors, friends, even David's coworkers shared it. Their comments scathing. The fallout was swift. My parents and David tried damage control, posting vague apologies about misunderstandings. But the truth was out. David's employer, a local real estate firm, suspended him after clients questioned his ethics. My mother's book club dropped her, and my father's golf buddies stopped calling. Their social circle, built on appearances, crumbled under the weight of public shame. I didn't stop there. Matthew uncovered more. David had used Grandpa's credit card for a new car lease, a sleek convertible parked at his house. I pushed the DA to seize it as evidence, forcing David to liquidate assets to cover restitution. The car was gone within a week, sold to pay back a fraction of what he'd stolen. In court 30 days after the emergency hearing, Judge Victoria Lane didn't hold back. "The evidence of elder neglect and financial exploitation is overwhelming," she declared, her voice cutting through the room. My parents and David sat across from me, their faces a mix of defiance and desperation. Matthew presented the full accounting: $150,000 diverted, forged signatures on a mortgage attempt, and antiques sold without consent. The contingency clause in Grandpa's will was invoked, permanently removing them as executors. I was named sole heir and power of attorney with court oversight to manage Grandpa's assets. A disinheritance clause sealed their fate. They'd forfeited any claim to his estate through their actions. David's attorney tried to argue, claiming he'd acted in Grandpa's best interests. I stood my voice steady. Best interests? He forged signatures, sold Grandpa's heirlooms, and left him to die while vacationing in Hawaii. I have the receipts. The judge's gavel fell, finalizing my guardianship. As we left, my mother grabbed my arm, tears streaming. "Ashley, how could you do this to us?" I pulled away. "You did this to yourselves when you chose wine glasses over Grandpa." David glared, muttering, "This isn't over." I looked him dead in the eyes. "It is for me." Their desperation escalated. They tried breaking into Grandpa's house one night, tripping the security system I'd installed. Police caught them rummaging through his desk, searching for documents to contest the will. The incident strengthened the restraining order, barring them from the property permanently. My parents flooded my phone with texts cycling from "anger you ungrateful child" to begging. "We'll lose everything." I blocked their numbers along with David's, and every relative they roped in to plead their case. Their words meant nothing. Family wasn't blood. It was action, and they'd shown none. 6 months later, Grandpa sat across from me on his porch in a new home closer to my base just outside Denver. His recovery wasn't perfect. Pneumonia had left scars, and he needed a walker, but his eyes were bright again, watching sparrows at the feeder I'd set up. "You didn't have to do all this, Ashley," he said, his voice stronger now. I poured him tea, smiling. "You'd have done the same for me." I'd requested a stateside transfer, landing a position at a military hospital 30 minutes away. It let me serve while checking on him daily, rebuilding the care system my family had dismantled. The legal battle didn't end with the will. The DA pressed charges against David for embezzlement and elder abuse, citing the forged documents and diverted funds. My parents faced lesser charges for complicity, their names tied to the mortgage fraud. David's assets, his car savings, even part of his house, were liquidated to pay restitution totaling $80,000 so far. The public exposure had cost them more than money. David lost his job permanently. My parents moved to a smaller apartment, their social status in tatters. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street to avoid them. I didn't feel joy watching them fall, just clarity. In Iraq, I'd learned to make hard calls under pressure, like when I stabilized a soldier while bullets flew, knowing one wrong move could cost a life. Here, the stakes were different, but just as real. Cutting them off wasn't revenge, it was justice, protecting Grandpa from their greed. I looked at him now, sipping tea, and knew I'd made the right choice. This taught me family is about actions, not blood. I had to cut toxic ties to save Grandpa, spotting betrayal early, whether it was David's lies about a startup or their ignored texts while he suffered. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Everyone check on your elders regularly. Look for signs of neglect or theft, unpaid bills, ignored calls, sudden spending. It can happen in any family, and ignoring it only enables the selfish. Don't wait until it's too late, like I almost did. Thanks for listening to my story. It's been a tough road, but sharing it feels right. Comment below with your own tough family choices. What would you have done? Hit like, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share if this hit home. Your support means the world.
Melissa, I need you to start training Kylie. She'll be taking over your role in the next few months. I stared right at Gerald Price and his companion, my heart pounding with disbelief. After 12 years of dedicated service to Eastgate Manufacturing Group, this was how my loyalty was being repaid. The woman sitting beside him couldn't have been older than 25, twirling her blonde hair around her finger while examining her manicured nails. She hadn't even bothered to look up when Gerald introduced her as my replacement. "No," I said simply, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The silence in Gerald's corner office was deafening. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Phoenix headquarters, the desert sun cast long shadows across the conference table where my career was apparently being terminated. Gerald's eyebrows shot up in surprise, as if no one had ever dared question his authority before. Kylie Monroe finally glanced up from her phone, looking mildly interested in the drama unfolding. "Excuse me?" Gerald's voice carried that dangerous edge I'd heard him use with vendors who dared to negotiate prices. I said no. I crossed my arms and maintained eye contact. I won't be training anyone to replace me without proper discussion about my future with this company. My name is Melissa Granger, and I'm 41 years old. For the past 12 years, I've been the operations manager at Eastgate Manufacturing Group, overseeing everything from vendor relationships to contract negotiations. I knew every system, every client preference, and every operational detail that kept this company running smoothly. When vendors called with problems, they asked for me specifically. When clients needed urgent modifications to their orders, I was the one who made it happen. But 6 months ago, everything changed when Gerald Price's investment firm acquired Eastgate from the founding family. The transition had been rocky from the start, with Gerald implementing cost-cutting measures that often backfired spectacularly. He'd already driven away 2 experienced managers, replacing them with younger, cheaper alternatives who lasted mere weeks before quitting. Now, apparently, it was my turn. "Melissa," Gerald said, his tone shifting to what he probably thought was diplomatic. "Kylie brings fresh perspectives to the role. She has a degree in business administration from Arizona State." I glanced at Kylie, who was now taking a selfie. "Does she have any manufacturing experience? Any understanding of our client base or vendor relationships?" "That's what the training period is for," Gerald replied curtly. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was asking me to hand over 12 years of institutional knowledge to someone who clearly had no interest in learning it, all while pushing me toward the exit. But something in his dismissive tone told me this conversation was already over in his mind. The history between Gerald and me had been contentious from his first day at Eastgate. Unlike the previous owners, the Harrison family, who had treated employees like valued partners, Gerald viewed us as expendable resources. The Harrisons had promoted me 3 times during my tenure, recognizing my ability to streamline operations and build lasting relationships with our key accounts. I thought back to my conversation with Robert Harrison, the former owner's son, just weeks before the acquisition was finalized. We'd been reviewing quarterly reports in his office when he'd looked up from the financial statements with concern. "Melissa, I want you to know that your position is secure regardless of who takes over," he'd said. "Your operational knowledge is irreplaceable. Any smart buyer would recognize that." If only he'd known how wrong he'd be. Gerald had made his intentions clear during our first staff meeting 6 months ago. "We're going to modernize operations," he'd announced, gesturing toward a PowerPoint slide filled with corporate buzzwords. Fresh thinking, innovative approaches, streamlined processes. What he really meant was replacing experienced employees with cheaper alternatives. In the months that followed, I'd watched him systematically dismantle the relationships and systems that had made Eastgate profitable. He'd alienated our biggest client, Morrison Industrial, by attempting to renegotiate contracts that had been carefully structured over years. He'd switched to cheaper suppliers without understanding the quality implications, resulting in 2 major product recalls. Through it all, I'd tried to guide him, sharing insights about client preferences and industry best practices. But Gerald had made it clear that he wasn't interested in learning from the existing team. He wanted to implement his own vision, regardless of the consequences. The breaking point had come last week when I discovered his relationship with Kylie. She'd been hanging around the office for months, initially introduced as a consultant reviewing our operations. But office gossip travels fast, and it became obvious that their relationship extended far beyond professional boundaries. She'd been seen leaving his apartment building, accompanying him to business dinners, and now, apparently, being groomed to take over my position. I'd noticed her complete lack of interest during the few meetings she'd attended. While I was explaining complex client requirements, She'd been texting or examining her reflection in her phone screen. When vendors called with technical questions, she'd immediately transferred them to me without attempting to understand the issues. The woman Gerald wanted me to train couldn't distinguish between different types of manufacturing processes, had never read a contract, and seemed to think our biggest client was a clothing company rather than an industrial supplier. But she was young, attractive, and more importantly, she was his. "Melissa, I think you're overthinking this," Gerald continued, snapping me back to the present moment. "Kylie is eager to learn, and your experience would be invaluable in getting her up to speed." I looked at Kylie again, who was now applying lip gloss while ignoring our conversation entirely. The request wasn't just professionally insulting. It was a slap in the face to everything I'd built at this company. The realization hit me like a cold wave as I sat in that office, watching Gerald's expectant expression and Kylie's complete disinterest. This wasn't a training opportunity. It was a systematic replacement. He wanted me to hand over 12 years of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and operational expertise to his mistress, then gracefully fade into obsolescence. "What happens to my position after the training period?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Gerald's slight hesitation confirmed my fears. "We'll evaluate the organizational structure as we move forward. There might be opportunities in other departments." Translation: I'd be demoted, sidelined, or eliminated entirely once Kylie had extracted everything she needed from me. I thought about the Morrison industrial contract I'd personally negotiated last year, securing a 3-year deal worth $8 million. I remembered staying late countless nights to resolve shipping complications, personally calling suppliers to expedite urgent orders, and building relationships with purchasing managers who trusted my word above any written contract. Now Gerald wanted me to hand all of that over to someone who couldn't be bothered to look up from her phone during a career-defining conversation. "I need time to consider this," I said, standing up from my chair. "There's nothing to consider," Gerald replied, his tone turning sharp. "This is a directive, not a request. Kylie starts shadowing you tomorrow morning." The finality in his voice crystallized everything. This wasn't a discussion or negotiation. It was an ultimatum. Train my replacement or face the consequences. I looked around the office that had become so familiar over the years, the awards on the walls recognizing Eastgate's operational excellence, achievements I'd played a significant role in earning, the framed photographs of company milestones, including the groundbreaking ceremony for our new facility that I'd helped plan and coordinate. Gerald was willing to throw all of that institutional knowledge away for the sake of his personal relationship. He was gambling the company's operational stability on someone who had never worked a day in manufacturing, never dealt with the complexities of supply chain management, and never felt the pressure of meeting client deadlines. "I understand your position perfectly," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "And my answer remains the same. No, I will not train Kylie Monroe to replace me." Gerald's face flushed red. "Melissa, I don't think you understand the situation. This company is moving in a new direction, and if you can't adapt, then you'll need to find someone else to implement that direction," I interrupted, meeting his glare without flinching. Kylie finally looked up from her phone, seeming to realize that the conversation had taken a serious turn. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice carrying the entitled tone of someone who had never faced real consequences. The problem, I thought to myself, was that Gerald Price was about to learn exactly how much he'd taken for granted. But that lesson would come later. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Human Resources with my termination papers spread across the table. Gloria Henderson, the HR director who had processed my promotion paperwork 3 times over the years, looked genuinely uncomfortable as she slid the documents toward me. "Melissa, I want you to know this wasn't my recommendation," she said quietly, glancing toward the door as if Gerald might be listening. "Your performance reviews have been exceptional, and your operational knowledge is, well, it's irreplaceable." I scanned the termination letter, noting the carefully worded language about organizational restructuring and strategic realignment. No mention of my refusal to train Kylie, No acknowledgement of my 12 years of service, and most insulting of all, no severance package. "Effective immediately?" I asked, pointing to the date. Gloria nodded reluctantly. "Gerald wants a clean transition. Kylie will be starting in the operations department tomorrow morning." The absurdity of the situation struck me. They were terminating the person who actually knew how to run operations while installing someone who couldn't tell the difference between a purchase order and a shipping manifest. It was corporate suicide disguised as innovation. "I'll need to collect my personal items," I said, standing up. "Of course. Security will escort you to your office." The walk back to my office felt surreal. James, the security guard who'd greeted me every morning for 8 years, looked embarrassed as he accompanied me down the familiar hallway. Other employees watched from their cubicles, whispering among themselves. Word traveled fast in a company this size. At my desk, I began packing 12 years of accumulated memories. Photos from company retreats, awards for operational excellence, thank you cards from grateful clients. But more importantly, I discreetly copied key operational documents onto a portable drive, procedures I'd developed, client contact lists I'd maintained, and vendor relationships I'd cultivated. Technically, this information belonged to me as much as the company. I'd created most of these processes from scratch, building systems that transformed Eastgate from a struggling manufacturer into an industry leader. If Gerald wanted to discard my contributions, he couldn't expect me to leave behind everything I'd built. My computer password was still active, giving me access to files that contained detailed information about client preferences, supplier relationships, and operational procedures that existed nowhere else. The Morrison Industrial account alone required knowledge of specific quality control measures, shipping protocols, and communication preferences that I'd documented but never formally transferred to company databases. As I worked, I could see Kylie through the glass partition, sitting in the conference room with Gerald while he showed her organizational charts. She was nodding absently while scrolling through her Instagram feed, clearly more interested in her social media than understanding the business she was supposedly ready to manage. "Take your time," James said quietly. "This whole situation is ridiculous." Even the security staff could see the insanity of what was happening. Experienced employees don't just materialize overnight, and operational expertise can't be downloaded like software. Gerald was about to learn that lesson the hard way. My phone buzzed with a text message from David Chen, a former colleague who now worked for Silverstone Industries, one of Eastgate's biggest competitors. "Heard about Gerald's latest decision. Coffee tomorrow? We should talk." David had been reaching out periodically over the past few months, subtly suggesting that Silverstone was expanding their operations division. At the time, I hadn't been interested. Eastgate was my professional home, and I'd been loyal to the company despite Gerald's questionable leadership. Now, everything had changed. I finished packing my personal items, handed my building access card to James, and walked out of Eastgate Manufacturing for what I assumed would be the last time. But as I reached my car, I realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Gerald Price thought he could discard me like outdated equipment, replacing institutional knowledge with inexperience and loyalty with convenience. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The next morning, I met David at a quiet cafe in downtown Phoenix, far from the industrial district where both Eastgate and Silverstone operated. He was already waiting when I arrived, scanning the morning news on his tablet while sipping coffee. "Melissa," he said, standing to greet me. "I have to say, Gerald's timing couldn't be better for us." David had been Eastgate's supply chain manager before leaving 3 years ago to join Silverstone Industries. He'd tried to convince me to follow him then, but I'd been committed to seeing through some major projects with the Harrison family. Now, sitting across from him in the morning sunlight, I wished I'd listened. "Tell me about the position," I said without preamble. "Director of Operations, reporting directly to the CEO. Salary increase of 30% over what you were making at Eastgate, plus performance bonuses tied to client acquisition and retention." He slid a folder across the table. We've been tracking Eastgate's struggles since Gerald took over. Some of their biggest clients have been expressing concerns about service quality and operational consistency. I opened the folder to find a detailed job description that seemed tailored specifically to my experience. Silverstone was planning an aggressive expansion into the same market segments where Eastgate had traditionally dominated. They needed someone who understood not just the technical aspects of manufacturing operations, but the relationship management that kept clients satisfied. "There's something else," David continued, lowering his voice. "Morrison Industrial has been in preliminary discussions about moving their account. Their purchasing manager, Patricia Williams, specifically asked if we had anyone with experience managing their requirements." My pulse quickened. Patricia and I had worked together for 6 years, building a relationship based on trust and reliability. Morrison's account represented nearly 20% of Eastgate's annual revenue, and Patricia had always valued the personal attention I provided to their complex orders. "They haven't made any commitments yet," David explained, "but they're clearly frustrated with the changes at Eastgate. Gerald tried to renegotiate their contract terms last month, proposing cost increases that Patricia found unreasonable." I wasn't surprised. Gerald had a habit of viewing client relationships as purely transactional, failing to understand the personal connections and trust that kept major accounts loyal. He'd probably presented Patricia with a spreadsheet analysis rather than acknowledging the value she placed on reliable service and consistent communication. "When would you need an answer?" I asked. "The position needs to be filled within 2 weeks. We're announcing our expansion plans at the Industry Manufacturing Conference next month, and we want our operational leadership in place before then." The Industry Manufacturing Conference. I'd attended that event for the past 8 years, representing Eastgate at vendor meetings and client presentations. This year, Gerald had planned to use the conference as a platform for announcing his operational modernization initiatives, with Kylie presumably playing a prominent role. The irony was almost poetic. While Gerald was showcasing his inexperienced replacement, I could be across the hall representing Silverstone's competitive expansion. "I'm interested," I said, closing the folder. "Very interested." David smiled. "I hoped you would be. There's one more thing you should know. Our CEO, Jennifer Martinez, specifically requested this meeting. She's been following your career for years and considers you one of the most respected operations managers in the industry." We spent the next hour discussing the details of Silverstone's expansion plans, their client acquisition strategy, and the operational improvements they wanted to implement. Everything they described aligned perfectly with the systems and processes I'd developed at Eastgate, but with the resources and leadership support I'd never had under Gerald's ownership. By the time I left the cafe, I'd already made my decision. Gerald Price had discarded me without understanding my value. Silverstone Industries was offering me the opportunity to demonstrate exactly what that mistake would cost him. Within a week, I was officially hired as Silverstone's Director of Operations. The transition was seamless, almost too easy, as if the universe was correcting a cosmic injustice. Jennifer Martinez, Silverstone's CEO, conducted the final interview personally, and her enthusiasm for my experience was a refreshing contrast to Gerald's dismissive attitude. "We've been waiting for the right person to lead our expansion," Jennifer explained during our meeting. "Your reputation in the industry precedes you, and frankly, Gerald's loss is our gain." Meanwhile, reports from my former colleagues at Eastgate painted a picture of mounting chaos. Kylie had indeed started in the operations department, but without my guidance, she was struggling with even basic tasks. According to Maria Santos, one of the production supervisors who'd remained at Eastgate, Kylie had already made several costly mistakes. She approved a shipment to Morrison Industrial that didn't meet their specifications, Maria told me during a quiet lunch meeting. Patricia Williams called 3 times trying to reach someone who understood their quality requirements. Kylie kept transferring her to different departments. The situation was exactly what I'd predicted. Complex manufacturing operations couldn't be managed by someone without experience, regardless of their educational credentials or personal relationships with ownership. Client requirements, vendor relationships, and operational procedures had been developed over years of trial and error, guided by institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily transferred. "What did Gerald say when Morrison complained?" I asked. "He blamed the production team for not properly training Kylie. Then, he sent her to a 3-day manufacturing seminar, thinking that would solve everything." I almost laughed at the absurdity. 3 days of generic training to replace 12 years of hands-on experience and relationship building. Gerald was living in a fantasy world where expertise could be purchased rather than earned. But my focus was now on Silverstone's rapid preparation for the industry manufacturing conference. Jennifer had moved up our expansion announcement, wanting to capitalize on the instability at Eastgate, while their major clients were reconsidering their options. "We're going to make a statement," she told me during one of our planning sessions. "Silverstone has always been competitive, but now we're positioning ourselves as the premium alternative for clients who value operational excellence." The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking Eastgate directly, we would demonstrate superior capabilities and let dissatisfied clients draw their own conclusions. My role would be to lead operational presentations, showcasing the systems and processes that could provide the reliability and personal attention that Gerald was systematically destroying. Patricia Williams from Morrison Industrial had already agreed to a preliminary meeting at the conference. She wasn't ready to commit to changing suppliers, but she was clearly interested in understanding Silverstone's capabilities. Other clients were equally curious, having heard through industry networks about my move to Silverstone. 2 weeks before the conference, I received an unexpected call from Gloria Henderson at Eastgate's HR department. "Melissa, I probably shouldn't be calling you, but I wanted you to know that Gerald is planning to use the conference to announce Kylie as his new director of operations. He's scheduled presentations about innovative management approaches and fresh perspectives in manufacturing." The news didn't surprise me, but it did provide useful intelligence. Gerald was doubling down on his decision, publicly promoting Kylie despite her obvious lack of qualifications. He was betting his company's reputation on someone who couldn't handle basic client interactions, let alone strategic operational management. "Thank you for the heads up," I told Gloria. "Melissa, I hope you know that most of us never supported what happened. Gerald made that decision on his own." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the industry manufacturing conference would become much more than a professional gathering. It would be the stage where Gerald's arrogance finally met its consequences, and where my 12 years of expertise would find its proper appreciation. The morning of the industry manufacturing conference, I stood in the lobby of the Phoenix Convention Center wearing my best navy suit and carrying the confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. The venue buzzed with familiar faces, vendors, clients, and industry professionals I'd worked with for over a decade. Patricia Williams spotted me first, approaching with a genuine smile that contrasted sharply with the polite but strained interactions I'd witnessed between her and Gerald's team. "Melissa, I heard about your move to Silverstone. Congratulations," she said, extending her hand. "I have to admit, I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk." Before I could respond, I noticed a commotion near the registration tables. Gerald and Kylie had arrived, surrounded by a small entourage of Eastgate employees. Kylie was dressed in a bright red dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a professional conference, while Gerald surveyed the room with the self-satisfied expression of someone who believed he was about to demonstrate his superior business acumen. "Is that Gerald's new operations manager?" Patricia asked, following my gaze. "That's Kylie Monroe," I replied neutrally. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "The one who's been handling our account requirements?" I simply nodded, letting Patricia draw her own conclusions. The Morrison Industrial account had specific quality control needs that required detailed understanding of manufacturing processes and careful coordination between multiple departments. Based on Maria's reports, Kylie had struggled with even basic order management. "Interesting," Patricia murmured. "Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation this afternoon. Jennifer Martinez speaks very highly of Silverstone's operational capabilities." As Patricia walked away, I felt a tap on my shoulder. David Chen appeared beside me, grinning broadly. "Ready for this?" he asked. "More than ready," I replied, watching as Gerald confidently led his team toward the main conference hall where Eastgate's presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. Kylie trailed behind him, checking her appearance in every reflective surface they passed. The contrast between Eastgate's presentation and Silverstone's became apparent within the first 10 minutes. Gerald had positioned Kylie at the center of their operational strategy discussion, introducing her as the future of manufacturing management, while she read nervously from prepared notes that clearly described concepts she didn't fully understand. When a veteran purchasing manager from Davidson Industries asked about quality control protocols for specialized orders, Kylie's response was a rambling explanation about leveraging synergies and implementing innovative solutions. The audience exchanged glances, recognizing corporate speak that masked a complete lack of substantive knowledge. Gerald tried to rescue the situation by jumping in with his own technical explanations, but his answers revealed that he hadn't absorbed much operational knowledge during his 6 months at Eastgate. He confused supplier terminology, misrepresented delivery timelines, and made commitments about capabilities that Eastgate couldn't reliably provide. By contrast, Silverstone's afternoon presentation felt like a masterclass in operational excellence. Jennifer Martinez introduced me as their new director of operations, emphasizing my 12 years of experience and industry relationships. When I took the podium, I could see familiar faces throughout the audience: clients, vendors, and colleagues who knew my work firsthand. My presentation focused on practical solutions rather than theoretical innovations. I discussed specific examples of complex problem-solving, relationship management strategies that had saved critical accounts, and operational improvements that had delivered measurable results. When questions came from the audience, I provided detailed, knowledgeable responses that demonstrated deep understanding of manufacturing challenges. The difference was unmistakable. Where Gerald and Kylie offered buzzwords and promises, I provided evidence and expertise. Where they proposed untested theories, I shared proven solutions that audience members had witnessed personally. After the presentation, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Patricia Williams was the first to approach, but she wasn't alone. Other purchasing managers and industry professionals crowded around, eager to discuss potential partnerships and explore Silverstone's expanded capabilities. Gerald's revolution was colliding with my evolution, and the outcome was becoming increasingly clear. Looking back now, I realized that Gerald Price gave me the greatest gift possible when he fired me for refusing to train his replacement. He forced me to recognize my true worth and find an organization that valued experience over appearances. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to someone. It's becoming successful enough that their dismissal of you becomes their greatest regret. In the end, I didn't need to destroy Gerald Price. I simply let him destroy himself while I built something better.